Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Heritage Society lecture, which tonight is presented jointly with the Conservation Group within the Construction Structures and Construction Division, and we also welcome any members of the Institution of Structural Engineers, and indeed any visitors. You're most welcome. We'll just first draw your attention to the emergency arrangements should you wish to leave in a hurry. No, if there is any fire or other incident, then the two emergency exits are the way you came in and the door on your right corner of the room. The Conservation Group in Engineers Ireland began life within the Heritage Society a couple of years ago, and subsequently found a home within the Structures and Construction Division. The current chairman of the group is Conservation Engineer Tim Ryan, and I'd like to invite him just to say a few words about the Conservation Group before we start the main activity of the evening. Tim, where is Tim? Here's Tim now. Tim?
Yeah. All right.
Say a few words about what you do.
Okay. The Conservation Group of Engineers Ireland is specifically interested in the techniques, if you like, of conservation of basically our built heritage. We specifically go after the engineering aspect of conservation in association often with architects, but it's starting to develop, the conservation side is starting to develop into a particular qualification, if you like. And there is a group which we borrow in effect, but we work with in Britain, which is called the Conservation Accreditation Register. And we're gradually getting in as many people as we can to join that register. This gives clients the guarantee that whoever they involve is properly acquainted in a conservation job with the latest techniques in terms of conservation, which use the best of the practices of the past. We are specifically respective of some of the techniques that were used in the past and have now largely been ignored. I mean, Ivor, who is one of our conservation group members, in fact the founder member, has been working on a project called the Hot Lime Project, in which he has discovered, for instance, that in the building of many of our major structures, the cathedrals, the castles, the method of making the lime for the mortar was utterly different from what we experience these days. It didn't come in bags, it was largely made on site. But discovering also that that particular material had its own qualities has been a revelation and has allowed us to go back and rebuild things as they should have been rebuilt in the past, replacing in many cases the use of cement. And this has been an education process that we've all been involved with, and that's part of our function. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Now, the subject of this evening's presentation is the restoration and conservation of the 13th century St. Mary's Church in Kilkenny, and particularly its reuse as a museum. The speakers who are associated with the project in various ways are architects Neil McCullough and Ronan O'Connor, chartered engineer Ian Crehan, and architect Evelyn Graham. Now, as each contributes to the presentation, I'd ask them to briefly introduce themselves, but further details are available in the handout at the door if you wish. So it gives me much pleasure to invite, first of all, Ian Crehan to commence the presentation. Ian.
Thank you very much, Ron. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening to our presentation, a combined effort, present our experiences on the St Mary's Hall project. Just very briefly speak about our project team. We have the client, Kilkenny County Council, represented tonight by Evelyn Graham, who will be speaking after me. The architects, McCull Movan Architects, Neil and Ronan over on my left here. We have ourselves, O'Connor Sutton Cronin, as the civil and structural engineer. Brendan Merriam Partners, Quantity Surveyors, McCarroll McSweeney, the M&E consultants. We also have some very important sub-consultants. We have Carrick Conservation, did an awful lot of work on the building fabric, and archaeological projects, the consultant archaeologists for the St Mary's Hall project. Also Brushaw and Bright 3D. And then, very importantly as well, the main contractor, Duggan Brothers. So just as an overview of what we'll discuss this evening, Evelyn will speak first and just give you some of the historical context and the need for the project. Neil and Ronan will speak about the overall design intent and the architectural design. I'll then just come back in and speak about some of the surveys and investigation works, the structural works, the building fabric, some construction challenges that we found, and just give some images of the completed works before we'll open to some Q&A at the end. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask then. If not, just hand you over to Evelyn.
Good evening, everybody. As Ian said, Evelyn Graham is my name. I'm Project Liaison Architect with Kilkenny County Council. I'm a graduate of DIT Bolton Street and have worked for most of my life within Kilkenny County Council. So I'm acting as the client representative on this project. And a number of the projects I'm involved in at the moment are relating to protected structures. Just to give you a bit of historical context, the first slide shows Pratt's view of Kilkenny dating from 1708, with St Mary's, that little turreted building in the centre, with one of the tallest structures on the image. And this shows what the central strategic location St Mary's had in the high town, within the walled city of Kilkenny. It was the parish church of the medieval city of Kilkenny and was built in the first years of the 13th century by Strongbow's son-in-law, William Marshall. It was amongst the largest and most prestigious parish churches in medieval Ireland. In the Irish Historic Towns Atlas published by the Royal Irish Academy, the late John Bradley, an eminent archaeologist from Kilkenny, refers to St Mary's, stating, "St Mary's is the parish church of the medieval high town, and Roth was probably correct when he said that it began as a chapel for those living near the castle." This map of Kilkenny shows the extent of the walled town, with the castle on the south and St Canice's Cathedral on the north. And there, St Mary's is strategically located about a third of the way along. So this map represents what is now known as Kilkenny, or Ireland's Medieval Mile, which has been branded by Fáilte Ireland as a promotional tool to further promote tourism in Kilkenny. So St Mary's, the new project, the Medieval Mile Museum, is the jewel in the crown of Ireland's Medieval Mile. So this is what the whole project is working towards, housing the Medieval Mile, which is going to be an orientation point for visitors to Kilkenny. You can see the strategic location next to the river and John's Bridge there, just to the east of the slide. And Bradley continues, "Throughout the Middle Ages, the town council maintained the church, and an annual charge of 4 pence was collected from each hall and a halfpenny from each stall or shop for this purpose. The patronage and upkeep of St Mary's were visible signs of the pride and wealth of the burgesses. Its tombs and chapels reflected their status, and it was an important venue for civic ritual." The church was very closely linked with the civic governance of the city, and I think it's fitting now that it has been restored by the local authority. Now, St Mary's appears in a lot of the paintings and prints of the city. That's it again, that big freestanding tower, and the Tholsel, or the town hall, just to the right of it there in the picture. Both the church and its bell tower, which was evidently spacious, were used for meetings of the council, and they actually held plays and meetings inside in this tower. But the structure was so badly built, they reckoned it fell down in the late 18th century. The current tower dates from 1819. And this was the footprint of the original tower. That's the town hall in the background. This was excavated during the project. Then this slide just shows, again on the top left-hand side, the location of St Mary's within the centre of the city, with the Tholsil and the Market Cross just above it. And it had a very close relationship with the main business of the town and the market stalls. The bottom right-hand plan shows the extent of the original church. The chancel and the north and south aisles were taken down post-Reformation in the early 18th century, and then the footprint of the freestanding tower is shown on the bottom right. Now, the need for the project. I mean, some of you may have visited Kilkenny over the years, but it has the best collection of medieval and Renaissance tombs. This is one example, the Richard Shee Renaissance mural tomb dating from 1608. We have a host of really interesting and detailed tombs and mausolea in the church, both inside in the church itself and in the churchyard. It's just a Aladdin's cave of treasures. And this slide shows the church with its tower intact. Apparently it was taken down in the early part of the 20th century. Again, just looking at a different angle, this shot was taken from Kilkenny Castle, and that's St Mary's right in the centre. It looks like it's just at the edge of the front garden, the rose garden of the castle. That's St Mary's Cathedral. A lot of people confuse the church and the cathedral, but the cathedral is much later, dating from the 1840s. That's the Catholic cathedral. And then on the right hand side of that shot is St Canice's Cathedral and the Round Tower. So it's a very important, prominent feature, but a lot of people had kind of forgotten about it. It had fallen into disrepair and disuse. This was an aerial shot taken of the building and the site not long after work began in February 2015. It shows the current complex just off the high street. There's a pair of almshouses just in the bottom of the shot, which are set for a further phase of development. But it just shows how tight and awkward the site is. I'm sure that Duggins and Paddy Byrne present here will attest to that. It was a bit of a nightmare getting plant in and out, but I think it was achieved fairly well without upsetting too many people. The neighbours were kept informed, and we didn't seem to have any complaints along the way. It's a prominent but hidden site, which is part of the attraction of the place. A lot of people don't really know it's there, but it's sort of a mysterious kind of a building and a site, especially with the graveyard. Following the deconsecration in 1960, the church and graveyard went into steady decline. The building was offered to the Board of Works at the time, but they would only take it if the roof was demolished. So thankfully, the Church of Ireland didn't go for that option because, as we found, the roof is one of the best preserved 17th century roofs in Ireland. So I presume Ian will touch on that later. So then we moved on to the conservation plan. It was an objective from the mid-80s for Kilkenny Borough Council, or Kilkenny Corporation as it was at the time, to see the restoration, conservation and representation of this unique site, which is central to Kilkenny's history. The conservation plan was published by the Heritage Council in 2005, and there was a wide range of stakeholders, including the local authority, the Department of Environment, Heritage Local Government, An Taisce, the Kilkenny Archaeological Society, University College of Maynooth, the Heritage Council, and Garda Síochána, because there was an awful lot of vandalism and antisocial behaviour going on in and around the site. So it's a great pleasure now to see it at such an advanced stage, and very satisfying that so much has been delivered from the conservation plan. So a timeline for the project moving on from this, there were some small works done around 2011, 2013. This was one of the earlier projects. This photograph was taken in the 1970s of the Shee Mausoleum, and I know Ivor was involved in this project, which was in advance of the main project. And then, this was the site in 2013, before work began. There was a small grant obtained from the Heritage Council, so this was just an example of how bad things had gotten. And work was done in this area because this was going to be the site of the new extension, which was going to overfly it for the new Kilkenny room, which Ronan, Neil and Ian will talk to you about later on. So there was about 20 monuments restored in this area. A lot of the ledger and chest tombs were smashed to pieces and vandalised. There was drinking parties and whatnot going on, and a lot of graffiti, as you can see on this shot. So in around the same time, the brand for the Ireland's Medieval Mile was launched by Fáilte Ireland, and then in 2013 a grant of about 3.9 million was secured from Fáilte Ireland to bring this project to the stage we're at now. So this was really the main driver behind the project financially, which enabled the project to go ahead. So this was the result of the first little conservation project, which everybody was impressed with. And it just gave a flavour to people locally who thought this was never going to happen. And they said, oh, right, the local authority are doing something right. So the design team was procured in 2012, and we received Part 8 planning at the end of 2013. Then this is the same She Mausoleum as works progressed. That was archaeology going on. There was a lot of deep excavation went on there for the piles, but Ian will talk about that later on. Again, so the need for the project, I mean, it was pretty obvious. The poor building had suffered and the site was turned into a car park in the 1960s post deconsecration. It became the home for the Kilkenny Masonic Lodge, and later on storage in the upper reaches of the nave for a goods department store. It was also a badminton hall. Maybe some of you visited it during the Kilkenny Arts Festival. There was exhibitions, but it was fairly unloved, and a lot of inappropriate works were done. While it was kept in use, there was a lot of inappropriate materials and rusty railings and bad repairs. These are just a few shots of the building as we found it. This is the kitchen of the Masons area, a very well appointed kitchen up in the upper reaches of the chancel. This is their dining hall. This is actually an interesting shot taken in 1955, a view west of the organ gallery at the west end of the nave. And locals report that the organ was burnt in the late 50s to melt tar to repair the roof at that time. So it was amazing what they did with materials to hand. And this is a plaque which was found in one of the monuments, which dates from 1774. Apparently, Mr. Gore, being the mayor, when the corporation bought the organ, the steeple was repaired, and they also bought a fire engine at the same time. So the local authority was at work back then. But it was a shame, obviously, that the poor organ was used for a nasty fire back or much later on. Then this is a view of the nave during the enabling works, which were carried out in 2014. We were trying to strip back a lot of the 1960s intervention, the structural frame that was installed for the Masons area up top. So it was looking fairly sad at that stage. Then we move on to the monuments room. During the time of the deconsecration, and as they were turning it into a parish hall, there was a lot of monuments arranged around the walls of the church, and the Church of Ireland didn't want to have those in a non-ecclesiastical building, so they formed a room which became known as the Monuments Room in the north transept, which was formerly the Roth Chapel, or Chapel of Michael the Archangel, and a massive mass concrete wall was built at the edge of the crossing, and a lot of monuments set into this wall and into the floor, and some of them just arranged loosely on the floor. This is quite an atmospheric shot, but it was looking a bit sadder in daylight. This is one of the vaults, one of the large vaults, which was the Roth family vault. This is a shot of Kilkenny archaeology, the site archaeologist, going down into this vault. It was a beautiful set of steps and lime rendered walls in this vault. And this is just one shot. This is just a little taster of the archaeology of some of the Roth family with their fancy coffins and stud work. I mean, there was even fabric found in these coffins. That see the remains of lettering there. It's C.R. Catherine Roth, 1774. So this is just a shot I got from the archaeologist of grave robbers. This was one of the reasons they built a lot of these fancy secure vaults, because there was a lot of grave robbing going on around the time. And this is the Roth vault and the north transept as we see today. So there's this project offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to investigate the archaeology within the church and outside it. And the church itself was just a honeycomb of vaults. Again, Ian will refer to that later on. And I think what we found exceeded all expectations. As you can see, there's a fabulous selection of chest tombs and monuments. And this was so good, it was decided to leave the floor open to view for visitors. And there's going to be a sound and light show in this area to explain to visitors what they see. And then we move on to one of the interesting discoveries. Some of you may have heard on the radio in August. There was a discovery of 14 skeletons just inside the gate. The initial 4, or these 4 females, they were found about a foot below the surface. And this contrasts quite starkly with the story of the rich merchants like the Roths family. And this has opened a unique window into the cold reality of life and death for the poor of medieval Kilkenny. They tell a tale of hard lives cut brutally short, probably by diseases and traumas that are today readily treated. Undoubtedly, further analysis of the bones will reveal further fascinating insights into life and death in the medieval town of Kilkenny and add to the treasury of attractions in the new Medieval Mile Museum. So these are the first 4 females. There's the 2 centre ones the centre one there, the main one is the 2 women of about 20, 25, and then 2 children beside them. So the locals and visitors were absolutely fascinated by this. We had crowds every day viewing these remains, and it's hoped to incorporate these into a specially designed museum case in the finished building, because it has a really fascinating story to offer us all. So these date from about 1250 to 1350 based on pottery found in the graves with them. So they would typically imply that they were not wealthy and they weren't buried in coffins. So just the last couple of slides, traditional building skills. It was always the intention to promote conservation training as part of this project. And as luck would have it, a small grant came our way just before the main project began. In 2014, the Department of Arts, Heritage and Gaeltacht picked Kilkenny as a pilot local authority to run some training. So at a very modest sum, we organised some training, and Lisa and pals had to put this in here. No, we partnered up with WIT, Applied Conservation Skills course, and the students from that course for 2 years, 2014, 15, and then 15 and 16, came up, and there was a series of lectures from all the design team. They had site visits and demonstrations, and then they got to practice on a section of wall and do line pointing, raking out, rendering on a section of wall within the graveyard. So there was 2 different groups. The first group, the site was fairly quiet at the time, and then the second group, and Paddy Byrne is in this shot, the second group had the advantage of the actual project ongoing, and Duggan's, the main contractors, were very cooperative in allowing a bunch of 16 students or so to tramp around the site every week and see what was going on and see a real project in action. So it was really beneficial to these students, and they gained an awful lot of knowledge and good experience from this. So it's something that we want to promote in Kilkenny, and we always wanted to see this as an exemplar project and an authentic conservation project. And I think it was a good example of good conservation in action, and trying to collaborate with the colleges in the area. So we hope to continue that on other projects. That's the end of my side. I just wanted to say that we're entering the next phase. The fit out of the actual building is about to commence this week. We've had museum designers Bright 3D from Edinburgh on the project, and the fit out company called Marcon are starting tomorrow, who are from County Antrim. They've worked on the Titanic experience in Belfast, and they've recently finished a fit out at the Pierce Cottage in Connemara, and we've really interesting digital display experience as part of that fit out, and it's a company called Centre Screen from Manchester. So we're really excited and looking forward to the opening, the official opening in the spring, and we hope we can all come and visit. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Evelyn. Neil McCullough is my name. McCullough Melvin Architects, one of the architects involved in the project. I'm going to talk about the ideas behind the project, and my colleague Rowan O'Connor is going to talk about the construction and building of the project. And I think St Mary's was a wonderful project, and it's a good it's a good opportunity for discussion, I think, about where conservation and intervention in new building are, how to approach it, how methodologies work that combine the obvious with kind of opportunities, which essentially follow the building's character, finding out everything about it, surveying it and recording it before taking any action on it. And I should say as well, it's a true fact in this project that it really wouldn't have happened in any way without a great client in Kilkenny County Council, and Evelyn is part of the team who actually were part of designing and building it and explaining it to the wider public, and bringing a whole wider bunch of people along with it. And in combination with that, I think an excellent design team, including O'Connor Sutton Cronin, who will talk to you later. And then we were very lucky in our contractor, in Duggan Brothers, who brought a lot of very thoughtful and well-resourced, careful approach to the building of the project at the end of the day. Evelyn's described the brief for the building, which is turned into a museum of Kilkenny's medieval mile, essentially a museum of the city and a museum for the display of, I think, a very unknown and interesting aspect of Irish art, which is prodigious medieval and Renaissance sculpture, a lot of which actually were based in and around this particular building. So what's in the slide in front of you is the building before we started, and the point only is that all buildings, I think, are unique. At first glance, this looks like a fairly typical Irish church, like a solid box with a 19th century tower. But even without much knowledge, I think there are subtle indicators that it might not be all that normal. There's a lot of older features in it, and the proportions, I think, are quite strange. When you see it in its urban context, and particularly Evelyn's referred to this as well, what's circled there is the plan of the church in the city, the medieval parish church of it. But the bottom photograph is its view from the castle windows, and the same man built the church and the castle, and the relationship between the church and the castle, I think, is mutely there and clear. You saw one from the other from the first day that they were built. And when we came to it, again, as Evelyn has referred to, the building was a mystery, and we had to survey it. Even in this context, it was cut up into a series of rooms in the 1950s and 60s to turn it into a parish hall. And as part of the work that we did, I think it was to kind of honour that work, which was done in the 50s and 60s, that actually saved the building, and was ingenious in its own way. And part of what we wanted to record in photographs and in surveys was all of those interventions that were put into it. You see there in section, ingeniously put into the building to make a whole series of different levels and floors that served a variety of functions. And all architecture in conservation is judgment. What do you take out? What do you leave? I think in this case the judgment was that the church was more interesting and better to take these out, but it certainly included a record of them all. The second was that in developing the project, we had to go backwards before we went forwards. We had to take all of that out, having recorded it and having surveyed the building exactly. We did a very careful project under very careful supervision to take out the steel and concrete block walls which were within the building, maintaining the stability of the original fabric. And we can come to talk about this when you come to talk about the building as a 13th century church. It's actually an amalgam of buildings over centuries. Part of it turned out to be 13th century, part of it is 17th century, part of it is 18th century and 19th century. It's a multi-date building. We achieved that, and as Evelyn has said, it was used actually in the Kilkenny Arts Festival in 2013 for a display of art. So while all the conversation was going on about what we would put into it and how the building would be changed, we were sort of going backwards, kind of going blindly backwards to find the building that we were talking about in the first place. In terms of approaches to the work, I think very common these days in terms of conversation, what way do you approach very important protected structures and buildings? Christchurch Cathedral being an example of maybe what you don't do very obviously. James Franklin Fuller's work in the 1870s is kind of wonderful and interesting architecturally, but involved the destruction of the vast majority of the fabric to produce this image of the church. And in terms of thinking about work, I think the way that we were trying to think about it was in a more archaeological way, where you would accept all the layers of the building's history. This is the Neuss Museum in Berlin by David Chipfield. It's just an old museum which was bombed in the Second World War and then contemporary interventions put into it. That the approach to it would be a very careful analysis of the building, a careful scraping back and exposure of the different layers of it, so the building told its own story. But that it was possible to think about contemporary change to that building or contemporary addition to that building if it was, in case of judgment, if it was judged to be right in terms of form and proportion, and if the work to the original building was extremely carefully done and that the new work was also extremely carefully done, that's actually possible to do. So what did we do? The first thing we did was nothing, and go through every record and photograph and image that we could find of the building. It was only changed in the 1950s, so there were photographs of the building before. And the monuments, which were around the walls in that photograph, were all taken off and put into the north transept, as Evelyn's photograph showed. Also, we carried a lot of survey, a repeated and extensive survey. I think from a design team's point of view, you can only comment on a building or make decisions and choices about what you're going to do based on knowledge. You have to know the building, and you have to know it better than anybody else. So you have to investigate, and do as many surveys as you possibly can until things link up. We thought, for instance, in terms of one aspect of it, that given that there was a certain amount of lime plaster on the walls, that since this church had been undisturbed for a long time, that perhaps we would find a lot of medieval frescoes on the walls. But we found actually that a lot of the walls had been replastered in a cement plaster in the 50s when they took all the monuments off it to actually replace them. It was just simply the building up of knowledge. And the great surprise and joy of it was the discovery of the roof, which Dendrick chronologically dates to the very early part of the 17th century. Historically accurate time for this to happen. Beautifully made piece of Irish timber work, which would have vanished if the building had become a national monument. All of which had to be actually approached, surveyed, and then conserved. One of the most interesting enigmas about the church, I suppose, was that clearly it had been bigger before, and it had been reduced. This is an image of the aisle of the aisle arcade of the nave before the works began. And clearly, it's a walled up. This gave access into the nave of the church, and clearly there was actually another space outside that, in the nave. And from the air, if you take the cruciform shape and you look at the bottom of the photograph, it was also very clear when you were there that it had been larger in the chancel. In fact, it had been considerably longer. Interestingly, when when properly surveyed and you included the chancel within the dimension survey of it, the building was very nearly symmetrical. It was the chancel was almost as long as the nave itself, which was a very interesting feature. The works were subjected to extensive archaeology. What you see in that photograph is in blue some of the elements which were excavated. You can see the cruciform shape of the church. On the very left-hand side of the image, in the long slit, is the outline of the tower, which Evelyn referred to. But you can see then the outline of the aisle walls, which in that case were to the north of the church, and just the beginning of an aisle wall to the south as well. And also in the location of the chancel, you can see the blue walls, which show clearly that we were looking at a more extensive building and medieval foundations in those separate locations. And since the building essentially had to be conserved, but required additional space for the display of the works in it, and also required a kind of a climate-controlled room where books and other precious objects were going to be displayed. The idea developed that we would, if you like, replace or reinstitute one of the aisles and the area over the chancel, and that we'd actually build them to a form which was contemporary, but it was built essentially on the medieval foundations, and that's something that Ian will talk about when we come to the detail of that. And that's an image of what we were aiming for at the outset. And we essentially decided that the contemporary interventions would be made in lead. So in other words, they would have a different character to the stone walls of the building, but they would have a sort of a quality, a kind of a materiality which would be similar to the stone of the building. And that's essentially what happened. In terms of the aisle, you can see there in that image on the left-hand side of that, on the right-hand side of the image is the outline of the aisle, which was excavated, which was over a number of archaeological excavations within the aisle, and decided to place a number of roof lights directly over where the archaeology was located below, as in that CGI, just a light would fall through onto the archaeology. So it's like an archaeology room. And that in the back, just in that image there, that we will build this room up over the other, over the rock tomb and the other tombs in the lower section, turning that into a crypt essentially, and making this Kilkenny room, which would carry on the line of the roof and look out over the city, with a sort of a character like that. This is an image we produced early on in the process. When you restore buildings to their original form, they start to do other interesting things in the towns and cities that they stand in. They change their nature to some extent. And the church, by coming closer to the river, sort of re-established a whole set of urban parameters that it had centuries ago. Two other aspects, I suppose, which come out of just how do you make a design decision out of the circumstance of a building that moves it forward. And we discussed the aisle and the chancel. There were two other ones in the design. One was the nature of the monument room itself, which Evelyn referred to, which was in a walled-off section of the north transept. You can see it just there at the top of the image there, where it says monument room on it, a very strong concrete wall across. And in that room, a lot of the monuments from the Church of Meath taken had been buried in a very heavy mass concrete wall, extremely well bedded in. And we decided, not least not to actually damage the monuments, but also that there was a need for a display wall within the building, that actually we would cut the sides of that wall off while leaving it intact, and essentially develop its character for the presentation of monuments on both sides. So this now stands inside the church and is a display wall for other monuments into the main part of it. And the second was in the centre at the crossing. in the work in the 1950s and 60s, the ceiling in that section of the church was taken out, basically to make additional headroom. And as the roof was so beautiful, and its exhibition would add so much to the enjoyment of the building for people coming into it, we decided, let's not put back the ceiling in that location, but let's, without any adjustment to it, exactly leave the line that was left in the 1950s and 60s, and treat that like a surgical cut where you can see up into the main, timbers of the building. It's at the crossing, and as you come down from the entrance to the building in the nave, you get this you get this increasing sense of depth and appreciation of what you're looking up to at the crossing. Just kind of clear in that example. So in the way the plan evolved, there were many other parts of the church. Probably the biggest thing that we did was replace the whole floor of the building with a Kilkenny limestone floor, which was in a sense an intelligent floor full of services which would serve for the fit out and heating. And you can see on that plan the new aisle with the roof lights, and then this room, which was called the Kilkenny room, just beyond the edge of the original chancel, a staircase and a lift, and up into this room that looked back out over the city. And in terms of the work on site, as I said, the vast majority of this is to do with the simple work of conservation, is to do with the simple things about plaster and slate and stone, and just trying to find your way back to the proper expression of those. This is one of the 13th century windows, a window embrasure left in the south transept. Some of the original sandstone. We want to leave a trace of some of the original stones in the building, and just some images taken a couple of weeks ago by Duggan's drone of the church. You can see that you can see the completed chancel. You get a great sense of the symmetry of the building in its original creation. There, you're looking south at the kind of new east end of the building. That's it in situ, with the repointing of the main stone on the building. That's it from the end, looking into the Kilkenny room. And the other side, and again, this is, I think, a masterwork of structure, which Ian will talk about. Not very easy to achieve. And just looking at the aisle there, finished in lead. And internally, the building is all about looking through one layer to another. That's essentially what I think the architecture says. You're looking at something from something else, always within a building like this. This is looking from a window in the Kilkenny room through the 19th century chancel window into the nave of the church. This is a picture from the archaeology, where you can see there the archaeological layer on the site wasn't meters and meters deep. It was 700 or 800 millimeters up to about a meter. And you can see there in the excavation, before we started the work, you can see on the cut stone of the pier of the north arcade, you can see the base of the original column. And again, they've all been finished and displayed, again, looking through one thing to another into the base of the building. So that again, in all parts of it, the building explains itself. It almost doesn't need to be explained. You can actually see it and read it. And again, some images just looking through into the nave of the church. They were just taken last week. You can see the roof on that. Just looking at the Kilkenny room, again finished in timber. Looking back out again, it's a kind of a process through the building from the entrance up the staircase, and you get a view out over the city. The staircase connecting them, and just not quite finished with the fit out about to start. You can see the beginning of the way that the church will feel itself, with kind of light falling on the existing funeral monuments. That's the aisle, and just a view of the church. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ronan O'Connor from McCullum Oven Architects. I'm going to touch very briefly on some of the principles of the architectural design, and particularly how they set up challenges in the structural design of the project. Challenges that we worked through with the full design team, particularly O'Connor and Cronin, And as Neil said, after having a full grasp of what we had in our hands in terms of surveying the existing building, the first and largest element of the existing fabric that we looked at was essentially the roof. And you can see this is a survey drawing that we did at the produced at the beginning of the project, outlining all of the different defects and issues that there were with the roof, as well as recording precisely its existing fabric at that time. We undertook a large variety of different types of surveys, which I think Ian is going to go into a bit more detail later. Oops. So I might just let Ian go into that a bit. But when we started investigating, we discovered that the main timber trusses, the oak trusses, dated from the 1600s. And in the detail of them, it was clear that they had been reused a number of times, and that there were carpenter's marks and different toolings from a different use. It was obviously a large number of timbers had been salvaged and reused. And when we surveyed the drawings, we annotated each truss with each defect. And just to take you through the process that we worked through with O'Connor Sutton Cronin, in that we identified each defect, and then we assessed whether that defect needs to be addressed or not, essentially. So many of the defects or elements of character, notches, holes, different types of tooling in the trusses themselves, many of them didn't have a structural impact on the overall roof itself, and we simply left them as they were. Here's an example of some of the many issues that we found in terms of that's a purlin sitting into a rafter, and the full detail of it there. So in terms of the procedure we went through in determining how to address this, we looked at we only repaired what had to be repaired, and in each repair we retained as much existing fabric as possible. And as well as that, when we looked at the type of repair to be used and the detail that we were going to employ, we tried wherever possible to make the repair reversible, so that if in 50 years' time, 80 years' time, 200 years' time, a better detail, a better process is discovered, that the repair that we used could be taken away and replaced with something else. We also, in the roof structure, and this follows throughout various areas of the building, discovered places where the construction detail or how it would have weathered or been changed over time was leading to problems itself. So you can see on the top right there, you can see an area where the lower rafters had been completely mortared in place, and that had retained a lot of moisture and led to decay of the timbers. Whereas we found the main quality of the oak, dating from the 1600s, was still in very good condition. Down at the roof level, the oak had deteriorated significantly. So we worked with O'Connor Sutton Cronin and with Duggan Brothers on site in terms of prototyping to come up with details that would allow ventilation to be maintained at the lower level of the rafters, to ensure that our replacement details were going to stand the test of time. This is a typical ridge detail, and I think Ian will show some of these in more detail later. But I suppose what we're saying here is that even when we arrive at a proposed detail that will work, that retains existing fabric and is reversible, there are also other issues you need to be concerned with, so as not to create new problems. So particularly when using something like stainless steel with oak, it's very important not to have any shelves or any crevices that can retain moisture, because any condensation that happens or any leaks that happen in future, if moisture is retained within your detail, the oak will deteriorate quite quickly. It's just it's a point that when you intervene in very old buildings with whatever intentions, you need to look very carefully at the consequences of that also. And this is just an interesting discovery on site, in that this is a valley rafter at the crossing of the church, and what was obviously a very small pinprick of a hole in the lead flashing over maybe 100 or 200 years had led to a very significant deterioration of the truss itself, which we had to scabble back and repair and support. This is a view of the roof when it was just about to be covered up again, and you can see very clearly in this the quantity of existing 16th century timbers or 17th century timbers that we were able to retain. There was only 2 or 3 sections of purlin that had to be replaced, and the majority of rafters could be salvaged, and that was through a detailed look at every defect to see if it really needs to be replaced or not. Many defects were left in the roof, and due to the cross-section size of some of the trusses, it still had more than adequate structural capacity to do its work. And the slating, we salvaged as much slating as we could, and I think we ended up with close to 30% new slate. And in reusing the existing slate, we ended up with diminishing courses and random widths in the slating. It's something that was planned into it at an early stage to ensure that that it was feasible. It's not such a simple task when you have many varying types, sizes of slates, and also thicknesses of slates, which can leave leave them sitting uncomfortably. In relation to the two main structural interventions, the north aisle and the Kilkenny room, this is a plan that Neil showed earlier, and the architectural intent, as Neil touched on, for both was to sit the structures on top of the existing footings, and to recreate spatially the types of spaces that were there previously. The archaeological enabling works showed us the locations of those footings, and we worked very carefully with O'Connor Cronin to be able to use those where possible and to sensitively sit our new structures on top of them. So this is a photo of the excavation of the north aisle area, where you can see a crypt and the outlines of some of the original walls. And this was a very early highlighted drawing, essentially, of the outline of part of the original church. We now know through various other investigations during construction that it was also slightly different to this, in that there were different building periods and further chapels associated at various times. Structurally, the aisle itself, it's a steel structure that sits on top of the existing footings and pockets into the walls of the church. And this is a typical foundation detail, where you can see again the principle of reversibility entering the architectural and the engineering solution. Here we have a separation membrane on top of the existing medieval wall at the bottom, and then a new concrete pad, a footing cast on top of that wall with the steel structure sitting on top of that. And that's the wall cast in situ on site with the hold down bolts, and that's on top of the medieval wall. The structure itself, the steel structure of the aisle, sits largely on the concrete footing and pockets into the wall, and Ian might go into a bit of detail in the design of that, in that we were keen not to translate any lateral load onto the wall of the nave itself. So the pocket detail for those steels, as you can see in the centre there, has a slip connection underneath, so that any lateral load's not transferred. It's the dead load is transferred. And the pocket locations themselves, in terms of how we approached each of those pockets, we first of all set out where would be the ideal place structurally to put them, and then looked at were we impacting any significant pieces of fabric, and then we adjusted. And it was an iterative process. We went through that a few times, so that where we were pocketing in the wall in any location, that it was treated like a piece of archaeology. Any of the stones that were to come out, we ensured that there weren't significant stones, and then we numbered them and put them in storage. So again, the principle of reversibility can be seen in that. And that's the steel structure of the aisle standing just before it was due to be clad. The Kilkenny room, as well as Neil described, is a new room that floats on top of existing funerary monuments that in the existing chancel area of the older church. The structural intent of the architectural intent of this again was to sit the structure primarily on top of the old footings for the old chancel, partly out of necessity, because the area itself underneath is completely full of tombs, and it wasn't possible or desirable to excavate more fully to find new footings. And similarly with the aisle, the principle of reversibility in that we cast a consolidating concrete beam on top of the existing medieval wall, again with a separation layer that the steel structure of the new Kilkenny room then sat on. And this is the steel frame being erected. And here you can see the older wall of the enlarged chancel at the bottom, with the new steel and lead-clad structure on top. And that's a view from the other corner. And again, Ian will go into in a bit more detail. But on one side we had, you see here, a very substantial wall to sit on, but we didn't have on the eastern side or the northern side. So we did have to. We did excavate and find the existing medieval wall, but they were the only locations where we could bring down columns. So we looked at a few solutions, and in the end put in some mini piles directly beside the medieval wall, and cast a pile cap on top of both to actually allow the structure to span. So there's two columns on the northern side and the existing wall on the southern side. I'm just going to touch very briefly on some of the other interventions, if you like, in relation to the fabric. And as Neil said, we didn't where we found areas that the existing fabric was wholesale removed. In general, and again, it does come down to judgment in marinating areas, but we didn't reinstate large areas of what would have been historic fabric. That allowed decisions as to the leaving exposed of the crossing timbers themselves, and our termination details in that way are quite modern and quite clear as to where you're cutting a line and where you're. We didn't want there to be any confusion in different areas. What's historic fabric? What's modern? It's quite clean and crisp. And some of the existing cornice where it was damaged was repaired, but areas where it was again completely removed, we didn't reinstate in full. And that's a view then of the actual crossing where the roof was had been removed in the 60s by the masons. In terms of some of the traditional building skills that Evelyn touched on as well, it was, and I must say personally, it was fantastic to work on a site which with such skilled craftsmen, first of all, and also some skills that are on the wane. It's true to say. So just some very small examples here of some of the masonry work that was undertaken. And again, we followed the principle of if we didn't know what was there in the past, we didn't recreate it. We reinstated what we could. And some of these we did have to replace a number of stones at high level, mainly due to lightning damage and fractures that were in the rocks, in the stones themselves, which meant that they could be unsafe. And the most impressive piece of carving was probably the finial cross, which the original you can see there on the left, and the replacement is on the right. The original was quite badly fractured from lightning damage, and we couldn't put it back up. And also the lead work, and I think as Neil touched on, we were keen to choose materials that were modern, but also complemented the existing palette of the limestone, the line pointing, and the slate. And these materials were detailed and crafted to complement the existing fabric. And you can see this in the lead detailing. And also in the steelwork internally, it was detailed in a crafted and handmade manner. And also the timber work inside the Kilkenny room itself. The architectural intent of this strategy, from investigations to structure concepts to detailing, it's to create a building that's unique, that uniquely of its place. That is, it's literally built on the foundations, on existing foundations, but it's not a pastiche. It's a modern layer added on top of the building that enables and enriches the whole. I think I'll pass over to Ian now to go through some of the detail of the structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Firstly, I'll just take you through some of the surveys and investigation works that were undertaken. So there was a large number of differing types of surveys undertaken. The first being the archaeological test excavations, then geotechnical site investigation, some timber surveys. So the first three of the three I'm going to speak about in more detail. But also there was GPR survey, topographical, some mortar sampling, some dating of timbers, and then there was also opening up works undertaken through Kilkenny County Council through their housing section. So the archaeological investigations undertaken late 2012, early 2013, and involved a number of trial pits or areas of excavation undertaken just basically to find out as much information as we could about it. So just taking through some of the key findings of that. So looking at the chancel to the rear, we managed to locate the original walls of the original below ground walls of the chancel on both sides. So we could say for definite that that's where they were located. There's also an awful lot of archaeology in the proposed North Aisle. So you had the You had the original wall located in a number of locations. The photograph is taken right up against this, like in this location here. We also found a crypt within the footprint of the North Aisle, and also then down this end we found the ruins of the original tower. The site investigation undertaken in September 2013, so just trying to give you a bit of a timeline as you go through here, and required very close coordination between ourselves and the SI contractor in terms of very constrained nature of access into the site for machinery. We required dynamic probes, rotary cores, and a percolation test to be undertaken. We prepared this drawing at the outset showing the nature of the access to the site. There was a couple of pinch points located as you worked your way around. One located at this location here was about 1.5 meters wide, so that was the limit on any test rig we could get in. The most extensive testing was around the area of the chancel to try and get as much detail, as much information as we could about the existing ground conditions in this area, knowing what the proposals were for here. So you can see here just some images of the rotary core rig. So the key findings of the investigations were we discovered that the fill extended for depths 2.5 to 4 meters below ground level. It was underlain by medium dense to dense gravels, and we were with that rotary core and dynamic probe. We had varying success in terms of how deep we could go. So the deepest we could get was about 5.8 meters below ground level within the graveyard. Then the timber survey. So at the outset of the project, we looked at through our own investigations up in the roof space. We understood that we would require some specialist surveys to be undertaken. These were undertaken by Jans Herman Conservation and Restoration Projects, and are split in two parts. The first part being the tower, and the second part being the main roof. The findings of the tower survey, given the nature of the tower, built later than the rest of the fabric, possibly not as well built in some places. And with all 4 external walls, there's an awful lot of areas of wet rot located throughout both the stairs and landing areas. And also, Jens had actually recommended that these areas should not be traversed. They're unsafe, unsound to be used. Within then the survey of the main roof, this produced a summary of each truss. So these were areas where Jens recommended that we need to look at in terms of repair details, some replacements as they were required throughout. And you can see here areas highlighted in the report of wet rot, cracking within timber members. This was then supplemented by our own getting up and crawling through the attic space. We had it was like an episode, the movie The Great Escape. Some of the areas we had to try and get through. But you can see here the differing where previous repairs had been undertaken, and also where we had defects within the timber work that required specific details to be drawn up for each area. So just going to briefly just touch through a number of these structural works. So the first being the enabling works, second being the floor of the south transept, then move on, just speak briefly about the north aisle extension, then onto the monument room, the Kilkenny room, then talk about some of our timber repair details and the tower repair works. So the enabling works undertaken in summer 2014 and removal of many of the later interventions, and also allowed construction of support to the monument wall. You would have seen some of the earlier images. So as you can see here, just some of the images of the building as we found it. So you can see the sports hall here. Then you can see the downstand beams supporting the floor, the mezzanine floor above. And then you can see some of the blockwork walls that divide the kitchen and toilet areas that were ancillary facilities for the sports hall. Then you can see after we removed them, you can see exposing some of the old stonework. We couldn't actually remove all of the mezzanine floor. We'd hoped to do this within the enabling works, because you could see there were a couple of columns at the central crossing. But this area of floor was actually, we found that there was props from this floor supporting parts of the roof, which I'll come back to in a later slide. The next part, the most extensive part of the enabling works, was the monument wall. This, as discussed, the monuments room was separated from the rest of the building, and we wanted, as part of the works, we wanted to bring this back into the main building, so you could walk all the way around. So this meant that we'd have to cut back the wall at either end, forming openings through. So we took the opportunity within the enabling works to put in 3 piers to provide the necessary lateral support to it. Just talking about some of the difficulties then we encountered in different design aspects that needed to be visited and then revisited as works progressed on site. The first was the south transept, the floor. We originally proposed a ground bearing slab throughout for all areas of the floor of the main church. When the excavations began on site from Duggan's, we could obviously discovered an awful lot of faults below the floor of the south transept. So you can see some of the vaults here and an aisle down through it. If we overlay then the 3 areas within the church where within the south transept where we'd carried out investigations, you can see how we managed to avoid every single vault. So it is obviously, when you think you have things covered, you never quite do. So as much investigation as possible. What we'd looked at doing then as a solution from there, and was through good collaboration between the design team, the client and the contractor. I suppose contractor first to be able to afford us the time necessary to relook at the design, and then to come up with the solution that was best for the project. We looked at a number of options, but we ended up going not a million miles away from where we were originally, in that we used a ground bearing slab, but it was a slightly thicker slab, and also had thickenings to line up with the walls of the below ground vaults. So this meant in future, if there is any defects within the vaults, that the slabs can span between the thickenings, so there won't be any adverse impact on our floor. Next area of interest is the monument room. So you can see some of the burials here and also the crypt here. So you can, as the proposals were to provide a walkway and a viewing platform within here, given the rich archaeological history within it. This wall of the monument room was constructed in the 60s, 70s. When they did that, they obviously disturbed some of the burials here to get down to a solid footing for the wall. So we piggybacked a little bit upon the works they'd done, and within that solution we looked at a slab, a low grade, or sorry, a slab at low level that would be approximately the same level as the foundation of the wall. Then there would be a retaining wall with 2 cantilever steel beams to pick up the upper floor. So then at the upper level then you had a suspended floor, and then the area in yellow was a slab that was built up off stone fill above the lower slab. So you can see here in a typical section being the foundation slab at lower level, the retaining wall, then the stone fill and the ground bearing slab. And then the area of the cantilever was the steel cantilever beams picking up the area of the viewing platform. So you can see here just the viewing platform as it currently sits, and then just some of the monuments within the room. The next area, the North Isle extension, Ron has briefly spoken about this earlier. So the archaeological excavations had uncovered the below ground walls of the original North Isle, as highlighted in blue here. So we proposed a capping beam to put on top of them that would support the steel frame. Then in between we provided two beams spanning between the elements of below ground wall that we could find. It was a lightweight steel frame built up off that, and stability provided by bracing in the gable, and then also using the wall of the north transept to provide stability in this area here. So these were my original sketches from it that made their way onto the better drawings, but it's the below ground wall with the membrane separating it, so we can go back in future to take it all down if needs be, with the steel frame up above. You can see them just shuttering and fixing rebar to cast it, and the beam with the holding down bolts in the bottom right corner. The two varying details then, we required vertical support of the wall of the arcade, but we didn't want to transfer any lateral load on the intermediate bays. We only want to do it at the end bay. So the first detail was a slip membrane for the majority of the beams with an area of compressible filler, whereas there was only a single area where we provided a fully packed and a hard joint, so that we could get lateral load transfer. Then the roof was designed as a full truss spanning from end to end to ensure that there was no lateral load was being transferred across at these intermediate points, and it was purely vertical load being transferred. So that was modelled just as a roller support within our design software. You can see just an external image of the completed North Isle, and then just an aerial view from the drone that was kindly arranged by Duggins last week. By far the most challenging aspect of this was the Kilkenny room, and it's definitely the one that gave me the most sleepless nights throughout the design process. To give you a bit of context to what we've seen some of the images here, but I'll just try and summarise what we had to deal with back in this area here. So we had the Shea Mausoleum for taking up a significant portion of the footprint. We had the wall that was rebuilt over the original chancel wall, which contained monuments and then also was overgrown with ivy to the rear. We had a retaining wall to the rear of the site, so there was about a 6 metre level difference between the graveyard and the properties to the rear and the laneway down. So that was a disused site just to the rear, so you can see the retaining wall that was there. There was also then a crypt, and then there's known unknowns, and then there's unknown unknowns. Those were the known unknowns. We knew there was burials there, but we didn't know outside of those what we'd find. So again, these are some of my initial sketches. So you can see here, we uncovered the below ground wall beside the crypt here. We also covered portion of it right up tight against the Shea mausoleum. We reviewed whether we use that for support, but we considered that it was so close to what was a very sensitive structure that we didn't want to run any risk of putting additional load into that. So we came up with a solution instead where we put it down pile foundations adjacent to the mausoleum, but we did use a cap and beam on top of the other section of wall that we found, and then we took the south wall as load bearing. So you can see this is again just my original sketch showing the two areas where we were able to have columns located, then the structure then hanging out over the Shea mausoleum, tied back in and ballasted back at the other end, and with a cap and beam provided to the top of the wall on the south side. As discussed earlier, there was works undertaken led by Ivor, which greatly improved the situation from visiting as the design went on. These works were being undertaken, so they greatly improved the structure of the mausoleum and of the south wall. There was one last stinging detail, I suppose, when it came to, this is the start of the excavations for our piling works beside adjacent to the mausoleum. So you can see here where we did uncover the original wall, but we decided not to use it, and then we were undertaking excavations either side to allow us to get in and do piling works. We uncovered burials each side of it. I suppose this was a crucial point for the project. This was the only way we could do this. So our last resort was to seek ministerial consent to move those burials, and that was forthcoming given the importance of the project. So that is the piling rig in. That is just an image of the pile cap, which has been left exposed above. Again, we were caught in terms of levels. We didn't want to cause any damage to the remains of the existing wall below ground, so we raised the pile cap up. This is an image then taken from scaffolding at a higher level, showing the first half of the cap and beam cast and the formwork in place to cast the second half. And then that's an image just of some of the steel structure as it's been erected, sitting down on the cap and beam. And then there's some views of the completed structure. The timber roof repairs, as part of following all of our extensive investigations, we were able to prepare drawings, some of which Ron showed you already, just for each area. So the plan layout, colour coded, shown in blue, what we propose to replace. So the low level rafters, varying rafters as went along. Then we have here the trusses just highlighted on plan. And then there is drawings prepared for each truss, so that you would look at areas where we required a repair detail or there was a defect within it, and then these were detailed out separately. So just going to take you through some of the works undertaken. So you can see here some of the images when the slates were removed. You can see the remains of felt. So this was the condition, the raw condition on the first day removed. I think that's Francis Cody, our clerk of works. They're actually getting his hands dirty, helping Duggins. What followed then was the Duggins covered the whole area with a temporary membrane, and then this started a weekly process where we go down, strip away the membrane in an area, walk the area between myself, Ronan, the clerk of works, Francis, between Paddy and John and their subcontractors, and agree the exact scope of works for each area. Then they go away, undertake the works. We'd come back a week or two later, inspect that area of works, and then we go on and repeat the process in the next area. So just some of the main areas of works that were undertaken there. So as Ron discussed earlier, the low-level rafters and the wall plates, all the low-level rafters and the vast majority of the wall plates were beyond repair and required to be replaced. So they were replaced with salvaged oak. You can see here this is the area that I highlighted on the drawing earlier, the purlin and rafters that had to be replaced. In terms of some of the details, a common detail, there were some common details throughout. The first was the Morrison tendon joint at the top of the trusses had failed in a number of areas. So we looked at a number of different options, what we do here. Whether we'd look at a type of timber repair or whether we'd go with something different. So we went with something different and looked at it as an option for steel repair. Again, just to reinforce the joint. Again, this would be reversible if in a number of years' time someone can go back and take that off. So you can see that completed in place. The next was the tie of the trusses. There's some areas where the joint at the top is failing. There's some areas where there was very excessive splits within the timber. We looked at possibly a number of different options, timber or steel, and then we ended up going with a steel option. So we ended up with putting in modern ties either side of it, leaving the timber exactly as we'd found it. Again, we knew that it would be we'd cause more damage if we tried to take out any of the existing connections. So we just left them in place, but that the truss itself has been reinforced. The two areas, Ron showed one of them earlier where there's an awful lot of the cross section of the main valley rafter removed. This is actually over the other side where you can see that there's a major split the whole way up the last metre or so of the valley beam, of the valley rafter. Again, we looked at it going in and reinforcing that with a steel splice detail. This is the one piece of timber that was holding up the whole roof. This is the prop up off the mezzanine floor. At some point in time, someone had thought it would be a great idea to cut the bottom cord of the truss here, and so this prop has been put in to stabilise it. Again, we went with a splice detail upon that. And as Ron discussed, the central crossing area has been left exposed in the final design. So you can see areas of the original timber. You can see our modern interventions and to strengthen the areas. And that there is a timber walkway or crawl space more than walkway, which has been put in to provide access for maintenance in future or for inspection. The next area was the roof of the north transept. So the north transept is a recurring theme here between the floor, the monument room, and the roof here. When we removed the slates, we found that all the battens in one area had been packed up to varying levels. When we traced that back, there was a major sag in the roof, and it traced back to a previous repair. So this area here, the truss was propped. And when we removed the previous repair, we found that the rafter or the element had almost totally split and had rotated in place. So this was propped. We actually took the opportunity here to, you can see little pulley system put in place to push out the bottom element and to push or to pull back in at the very bottom and to push out at the weakness before that splice place was put on. So we were pulling the timber back to its original location to remove all the sag. So you could see the roofer back then putting in the battens went back in level at that point. Then there's just some other images again, just of some of the steel works. That was one of the images Ron showed earlier of a major crack down through that element. And also over here, so again, just the details we provided to stabilise these and to ensure the longevity of it. The tower repair works. The tower had the timbers in here had very very high moisture contents, up in the high 70s some areas, and had an awful lot of areas of wet rot. There was an awful lot of replacements and repair works required here. So we prepared our drawings for each floor level of the stairs you went up, prepared the details, whether it be splicing the ends of the joists, whether it be replacing the timber lintels, or replacing the prop elements for the stringers. So we actually, on that string element, we actually cast in an angle with studs off the back of it, cast into the pad within the wall to avoid having the ends of the timbers going in, being pocketed in. One of the more interesting aspects of the tower was there were 3 large trusses at very high level which would have supported the bell originally within the tower. The trusses themselves were in excellent condition. The only defect we could find within it was that where the timbers bared on, there were bearing pieces each end of it, and you can see the extensive areas here of wet rot within them. We again looked at a few different options what to do here, trying to reuse as much as we could. So we temporarily pulled the trusses up, supporting them there, removed the bearing pieces and just flipped them, turned them upside down, removed the areas of wet rot at the ends, and there was still more than enough cross section there to take the loading which is on it, so we just put them back in upside down. So that was one area where we just tried to reuse as much as we could. Going to just briefly on the building fabric, this is led mainly by Carrick Restoration and Ron. So we had with Peter Cox and John Beattie in Carrick. It basically was very extensive, but involved a very slow process of raking out all the bed joints and repointing with a lime mortar mix. There were areas where we required a bit more intervention. 2 of the arches had failed, so they required needling, temporary propping, and full reconstruction of them. And there were 2 other arches where the facing stone was just unstable, so again just required reworks there. So you can see the form that was used. The stones were taken down, numbered and put back in place. Also on the tower there was works up at the top of the tower, so for the capping stones, so repointing in this area here and replacements and repairs of some of the finials. Sorry, that's just a zoomed in image from one of the drone pictures. Again, internally within the building fabric, removing all the plaster and replastering throughout. Just going to touch very briefly on construction challenges. John Butler or Paddy Burner up the back there from Duggan's, I'm sure, could talk about many more than I will here, but I just talked about 3 or 4 that I found and thought they dealt with very well. One was the nature of the access into site. It was a narrow laneway down between 2 shops. When it was worse than when you got to the actual gate into the site, because the gate was at skew and was much narrower again than the laneway. So one of the first things that was undertaken was a survey of this pier. All the stones were numbered. And that pier was carefully taken down and stored on site, and it gave them sufficient access then to well, I won't even say sufficient, but it gave them enough access to be able to get some of their deliveries in. The next one is the crane, which was they required a very large crane to be able to, obviously, there was only one area where we found we could put it, and that was actually nearly along the lines of the original tower. So there was pile foundations required for that, and you can see the ground beams that was put in on top of those pile foundations. This crane had to be able to reach the Kilkenny room right at the back, and one of the actual, I suppose, bonuses of being able to reach there was it was also able to reach the disused site down at the lower level, which Duggan's managed to negotiate some rent for some storage in that area, which when you look at the rest of the site, you can see that although the walled grounds are very big, there's all this area covered in graves, so there's very minimal storage area for them on site. The other area shown up in this picture, I think, was the required sequencing, that the works to the north wall of the main aisle had to be completed, scaffolding removed before they could commence work on the structure of the north aisle. The same with the rear wall of the chancel required that all the works were done to that before you could move on to the Kilkenny room. Archaeology. Every time a bucket or a spade went in the ground, we found something. So again, it was just required Duggan's patience, as I said earlier, just their patience with us to be able to carry out the necessary investigations, to be able to go back and look where we need to undertake some redesign, and then to work with us to carry out those works. And the last area I'll speak about, just the amount of scaffolding required on site. You can see here, this is the scaffold, how many different levels were required within the main body of the church to get up to allow for, firstly, the stripping of the existing plaster, and then the replacement of that. And then you can also see the extensive scaffolding that was required around the tower. So just some of these images you will have, some of them you will have seen earlier, just some images taken in the last couple of weeks. So you can see again the Kilkenny room, the North Aisle extension, as we move around. The Kilkenny room, view into the Kilkenny room. Then just a wide lens shot showing the wall of the north transept, the North Aisle extension, and the wall of the Kilkenny room. Just some views internally. That this was the views taken very bravely by Ronan of the crawling along the maintenance access route that we showed you earlier, looking down onto the monument wall with the piers. And we also took this opportunity to put a steel frame into that monument room to carry some of the other headstones and other monuments that were discovered as works progressed on site. And you can see some elements of glass floor to view the exposed crypts below. Just a view from the main aisle, and then just looking back down towards the front church. Just some acknowledgements, as much from a personal level as opposed to from the project team. First to Evelyn Graham and Francis Cody, the Clerk of Works in Kilkenny County Council. To Neil and Ronan from McCulmovan for assisting us and presenting many challenges for me. Thank you. And to all the other members of the design teams, to Peter Cox, John Beattie and Carrick, to Damien Morgan from Brendan Mary's, and to Duggan Brothers, we've John Butler and Paddy Byrne here with us, and also Pat O'Neill and Damien who were on site. So we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have.
Well, first of all, I'm sure that you'd like to thank our speakers for a very detailed presentation, and certainly there'd be a lot to study for an examination. I wouldn't remember half the things that have been said, but some certainly have sunk in. So thank you very much for that presentation, first of all. Now, normally our webcasts don't usually go on beyond 8 o'clock, so I won't ask the speakers to all cluster around the microphone here, but I would suggest that if you have any questions, detailed questions of any of the speakers, that maybe to do so over a drink in the bar or a cup of coffee, because I think that you'll get to the speakers much better than having them coming up and down to the microphone here. So I hope you'll accept that suggestion. The next meeting of the Heritage Society will be Monday the 6th of February, usual time. The speaker will be Joe Ryan on the subject of Irish Shipping Limited in World War II, so I look forward to that. It's very, a little bit different to a medieval church in Kilkenny. So to conclude the meeting, I would like to wish you an early happy Christmas and safe home. Thank you.